We are students of the art of play,
And we do this show called The Art of Play.
a show for the players who ask, why?
My name's Vi.
And I'm Gaia.
Hey Gaia, what are we talking about today?
So today, we're going to be doing our long-faded episode that we've talked about a little bit now of environmental storytelling.
Yes.
So let me give a little bit of a primer of what we're going to be kind of talking about today, as I know this concept is a little bit less formal, at least in concept, than topics such as depth versus complexity or tutorials or other things we've been talking about. So today, we're talking about how to notice when a story is being done well, and not just directly how a story is done well, but all the ways that authors, story writers, and those who are communicating with you can make a story more beautiful, more defined, and more interactive for you as a player, so that you can have a better time with your games and experiencing stories in a way that fits for you, to reward you in the process. Mm-hmm. So one of the hardest things of this topic is going to be getting a definition, a formal idea of environmental storytelling for this episode. Now, I know I've kind of tasked you with a bit of the research for this episode. So let's throw this over to you, Vi. Can you tell me, what is environmental storytelling and why should we care?
I can, but I want to start with just two sort of broad scopes of how we tell stories.
Yeah, go for it.
So we have direct stories, and that is, or direct methods, I'll call them, which is stuff like cutscenes, finding a book or a notebook or notes a character has left you, talking to an NPC, narrators, or just on-screen text, right? Just stuff that the video game developers or your DM just hands you.
Yeah, so direct storytelling would be the cutscene, when you're kind of forced out for a player or an NPC to tell your player character, this is what's happening. Or that one scene in Lord of the Rings where Gandalf is at, Rivendell?
It's Rivendell,
early on. The first elvish city where they all start their quest. And he gives, in the original book, 8 straight pages, no pauses, no even said, of just pure history narration.
Yes.
That's direct storytelling. That's in-your-face storytelling.
Yeah, just sort of being like embodied immediately by Tolkien, just to be like, I have some lore that you need to know.
Tolkien is perfect for direct storytelling. But
Yes.
we got that. So what's the other method?
Indirect storytelling. So this would be everything else, right?
So everything that's not just screaming in your face.
Yes. This is the mystery your DM has set up, that kind of thing. It would show the outcome of a series of events in your environment. So stuff like classic crime scene forensics, right? A series of events has happened here, and every piece of that event where you've interacted with the environment has left a trace, right? You stepped through the flower beds on your way out the door, your footprint is there. So coming in afterward, that's what you see, is what's been set up in the environment. And that's environmental storytelling.
So it's not just the story at hand, but it's thinking of the events before the story to kind of, or even the events as they happened, so that when the player experiences it later, they see the traces and can follow the path themselves.
Yes.
Kind of your mystery game, your crime is an amazing example for it, but any mystery is really kind of getting at the heart of it. Mm-hmm. So
anything here that is more collaborative than performative.
Yes.
If you as a player have to infer actions of other people based on what you're seeing, that is indirect storytelling. That's where our environmental storytelling lives.
So our environmental storytelling is it's kind of a subset of this indirect storytelling.
Yes.
It's anything that is in the world around you that you're experiencing but not necessarily reading as text is kind of what we're going for.
Yeah.
Okay. So obviously this is a very difficult topic compared to our previous topics. Tutorials are you know what a tutorial is, you've played it, let's design one. Depth versus complexity, well, it's a bit more abstract, you know what it means, you get the idea. This is a very abstract topic.
Yes. This is one of those ones that we're really looking at the scope of video games and storytelling, and we're trying to discern where this thing is effective, because when it's there and when it's effective, you notice it. And when it isn't there or it isn't effective, you don't notice it. It's blank. It just feels off.
And the big problem is probably going to be that when you do environmental storytelling wrong, you're not doing it at all.
Yes.
There's no environment to experience if you've messed it up because it doesn't fit with the story.
Yeah.
So
when it's done poorly, it's absent.
Yeah. So that should give you as the listener an idea for how this episode is going to look. In this episode, we're going to be talking about various examples of environmental storytelling and different methods of achieving it effectively. Now, once we've completed that, we're going to go pivoting into more D&D style discussion and how you, as someone who might be creating media, would be able to use environmental storytelling to your advantage. And then we're going to clue up a bit with a discussion of how environmental storytelling is important and how you can recognize good environmental storytelling in the games you play so that you can help make better games. Or I think I saw one quote, make better games better.
Yes.
Which I think is a wonderful little tagline.
Yeah.
So because we're focused on positive examples, we're going to really make sure you as the player, you as the viewer, well, listener, understand good environmental storytelling. Mm-hmm. And what better way to start than the game that itself is just environmental storytelling.
Environmental storytelling.
That's all that it is, start to finish, and it's executed perfectly. Vi, lead us in.
So most video games are a mix of direct, indirect. You will find environmental storytelling along with direct storytelling. You'll find cutscenes, you'll find text, and then you will also interact with your environment.
Oftentimes a mixture of everything makes a good story.
Except with Unpacking, which is a game I've talked about a little bit before, but it does this really well because the game is solely environmental storytelling. Now, Unpacking, if you haven't played it, I think that you should, especially if you want to understand environmental storytelling. So in this game, you unpack boxes as a person moves into different spaces in their life.
Yeah, you're unpacking their boxes particularly.
Boxes. And it's one particular person.
As they're kind of growing up, right?
Yeah. So the first boxes that you unpack are in, 1997, and they've moved into like a new house, and there's a bunk bed. So you're unpacking a lot of like toys and art supplies and like trophies and kind of stuffed animals and things like that. And you start to learn a little bit about like who this person is and what they like.
So we're kind of looking at like an elementary school student, yeah?
Yeah.
Kind of young, determining their future, but still a blank slate in some ways.
Absolutely. And as you do these big moves, so, you go from that house to dorm to first roommates to first boyfriend and on and on. And you learn about this person and the things that they're doing with their life through the objects that you're handling, through what you're unpacking. And unpacking it is at its heart a puzzle game. Like, things go in particular places, right? If you unpack a toothbrush in the kitchen, you have to go put it in the bathroom, right? So that's the fun of the game.
The fun of the game is the puzzle.
Is the puzzle.
The understanding that comes from trying these different challenges.
Yes.
Yes.
But Unpacking does environmental storytelling so well that it made me cry. Like, full-on tears by the end of this game, which isn't very long. I played it all in like an afternoon.
I have to say, I haven't had a game make me cry since I played Life is Strange.
You really should play Unpacking. Like, I think I might go home and play it again. Like, it's just very good. But when let's bring it back to environmental storytelling.
Let's bring it back.
So we talked about indirect and direct storytelling. And because there's no cutscene, there's no text, there's no other context that you're given aside from items and the connections that you as a player make to those items. So there's a series of souvenirs that this person gets from traveling. So there's a London double-decker bus. I think there's a Leaning Tower of Pisa. And as you move, there tends to be more of them, right? So they come back from Japan at one point and they have another little item. And they're always unpacked as a series. And so you learn that, oh, this person likes to travel, and every time they come back from a trip, there's another one.
There's this little souvenir, this little record of their past. Yes.
And it just shows how people interact with their environments and the traces that we leave behind as people. And so that's where Unpacking shines. And that's really environmental storytelling.
Yeah, so the idea of Unpacking's environmental storytelling is learning the life of a human being, of someone who's going through growing up, like growing up with them, but in these like little sections. And I think I've heard you talk about this before, and you mentioned that there's no text in this game. The only text you get is the title of each level, which is just the year that you're doing that unboxing or that unpacking for, right? Which I think is a beautiful way of doing environmental storytelling.
You just get these like little narrative associations basically between objects and events.
Yeah, and you're kind of putting together a life in your head. And the important thing here is that because it's a puzzle game, because it's a game that's trying to let you have the lead in thinking of these ideas, it doesn't tell you who this person is beyond this. It doesn't force an idea to you. The kid, whoever it is who you imagine it is.
Yes, and this game trusts the players to make those inferences. And we've talked about this before when we talked about tutorials and, don't baby your players, but trust your players to see connections, to understand information aside from what you tell them directly.
Yeah, one of the beautiful things in lots of gaming is that you can trust your players. You can see that your players are intelligent, that they're caring, that they want to learn and to experience these things with you as a developer. So you can have this form of environmental storytelling lead the way and let your player fill in the blanks.
And we'll talk about this as we get to D&D as well, but it is the care that you have with your players to say that I trust you to try to understand this, right? I'll help you. I'm here to help as a DM. But I trust you to take the things that I'm telling you and go think about them.
Yeah, of course. And that's kind of one of the key elements. Now, I know that we have a few other examples of environmental storytelling, and I have my treasure child for my example. I want to talk about Undertale.
Of course.
Now, in our very first episode, the first introductory episode, episode 0, we called it, where we talked about our various gaming hobbies and things we love and things we want to talk about. I talked about Undertale. Now, that's a bit of a while ago. We're on episode, 4 now?
Already? Oh my goodness.
This is, yes, because I have still one more to edit. So this is episode 4 at the moment. So it's been a while. So let me give a bit of a primer. In Undertale, you play as a kid who, for some reason, through a series of images, no text about it, you walked up a mountain and fell in, like a dead volcano.
Yeah.
Right? Why did you fall in? We don't know, because it was basically Mountain Doom. You were never supposed to go up there. You were told not to go up there. Never approach this mountain, yet you did, knowing the danger. And your character is not portrayed as a daredevil, so it's a very interesting piece of the game. And early on in the game, you get attacked. Now, I'm not going to say by who or by why, though I think I did in episode 0, but you're approached by a woman named Toriel. She is the tutorial of the game. And she teaches you about the world that you're in, and she brings you to her house to treat you as her child. She literally she says to you, "My child." Like she expresses her love for you, her care for you, her wish that you do well. She talks early on about setting up an education for you and preparing for a future with you so you can live well and be healthy in the underground, right? And what ends up happening is you have to leave eventually. You have to exit the tutorial, exit your mother's care is kind of the vibe it's going for, and make it throughout the rest of the game still. So you make it to the end of the game. You've gone through now hours upon hours of gameplay. You've made it through Snowdin. You've made it through the caves. I was going to call them wetlands. And you've made it, well, it's called Waterfall. That's what it is.
You make it through the riparian zones,
Yeah, and you make it.
Sorry.
So, and then you make it through Hotlands. You defy death nonstop. You bring other people to your side. You convert them. You teach them that humans are good and that are caring in this world of monsters that have been sealed away from a war long forgotten. You teach them that humans can be good.
My typical school day.
Of course.
Yeah.
So you make it to the end, and you make it to Asgore. And here's the thing that people have started talking about. They mentioned the queen who has left, who has locked herself away, who's returned to wherever they began, where they were first locked away underground. And it doesn't tell you who she is, but you make it to Asgore's palace at the end. And you walk up to it, and it's the same house as the start of the game, Toriel's house, but it's gray. Everything is monochrome. You walk in, and you hear the same music as the start of the game, but slow and careful. It goes from like a full arrangement to a single piano.
Right.
And you walk around, and the whole house is gray. The kitchen says it hasn't been used in a while, right? The living room has a chair that's with a layer of dust, untouched. The fireplace, not even coals, right? You walk to the rooms, and you can go to the child's room, and it says it's locked. And you can go to the room that was Toriel's in the original game, and it's locked. But in Toriel's house, there was a third room that you couldn't enter. And now that you're in Asgore's house, you can enter it, and it's his room. And you've learned now that Toriel was the queen, and that something happened between her and the king, her husband, that has led her away from the kingdom, to banish herself, to not open up and to see the world outside, to leave. And you have this sad music playing, but there's one consistency in this whole area. A single yellow flower. Every few rooms, there's one in the hallway, one in his bedroom, one on the way to see him. a single yellow flower. And it's the only thing in the entire area that's not monochrome.
The only color.
The only color is a single yellow flower. And there's something beautiful about it when you're experiencing this, because you feel depression. You feel
Yes.
this loss, this sense of loneliness, of abandonment, and this little tinge of hope, this tinge of care and of love that's gone, that's just fading away. And you walk through where the exit would be in the original game, or not original game, in the early game.
In the tutorial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you make it to Asgore on a bed of flowers by a throne. And he speaks to you saying, hold on a moment, allow me to finish watering the flowers. And he waters them. He goes through, you have to wait. And he turns around and he stops and it's like, greetings, how may I? Oh. And he's like, he stops. And you can see this, like, it doesn't say it, but you can see his face goes from like cheery to just dread.
Yeah.
And he looks at you, it's like, I so wish to offer you a cup of tea right now.
That's rough.
And then he just sighs. He sighs multiple times and he says, you know what we must do. And he just walks to where the fight will be. And he says nothing. He waits for you. And when you go to fight him, it's in this like area of like this white background with these like fully like white doorway kind of thing with black pulses going throughout. And he says, this is like the seal that has locked us away from humanity from all those years ago. And he even gives you the option of saying, if you have anything left that you need to do, please go do it. I'll be here. And there's this indirect sadness, this loss, this dread that you felt from the moment you entered. The slow music, the grayscale background, the locked up doors for his wife's room, and the single yellow flower.
These are things that this game has done really well, to tell you the story without telling you the story.
Yeah, and you
This
now know...
This is show, don't tell.
Yeah, and you know everything about Asgore from this. He's powerful. He's large. He has the stature of someone who could break a wall with a single punch. Like, someone who could tear down empires.
Is your final boss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet he's caring and sad and remorseful, and he dreads this moment where he sees you. And he wishes beyond all hope that he didn't have to do it. And he even tells you, if you don't want to, you can go back.
Right.
He will wait. That no fight must occur. But once the fight starts, there is one more piece of like storytelling. And this is much more direct than anything else I mentioned, where he says, it's time, goodbye. And he takes up his weapon, and you have this button the entire game, a mercy button, to forgive enemies, to allow the fight to end peacefully.
Yes, because there's a way to play this game, which is that you don't kill anybody.
You don't kill anyone. You don't even need to harm them. You can get through the entire game pacifist.
Yeah.
And he destroys your mercy button right at the start.
Yeah.
There is no pacifist ending to that fight.
Yeah.
But it screams this conflicted story. And you know very little about Asgore. Everyone who talks about him says he's this big softie or he's this great giant king. And those are the only two things you hear. The only person who calls him a softie is the head of the royal guard.
Yeah.
Everyone else is this great king who will save us from this banishment in what they call hell. They'll bring us back to the surface and save us.
This is also the fight where if you eat the pie that Toriel baked you in the very, very first, like in the tutorial, if you eat it in front of him, he like stops for a second.
Yes, if in the original tutorial, Toriel bakes a pie for you, butterscotch cinnamon.
Something? Yeah.
Butterscotch cinnamon pie. And if you bring that to the end of the game, which is very hard, it's the best healing item in the game, and you eat it in front of Asgore, he gets a stat debuff. He gets minus defense, minus attack. And it says that he pauses for a moment and looks like he's remembering something. And then the fight continues.
When you told me the story the first time, that's the bit that like really hit me.
It hits really hard. And this entire time you've been told, great king will save us, will free us from the underground, will bring us back to glory. And one person who says, oh, he's a great big softie, he couldn't harm anyone. And you meet him, and he has said nothing. You know none of his history. And yet you now know everything.
Yeah.
Everything. And that's the beauty of environmental storytelling when it's done right. This is the wonderful thing that you can get from it. Now, I've talked for a little while about Undertale. We know it's my favorite game of all time. I love this game so much, but don't let me take all the fun. We have a bit more that we should have found out here from Undertale in environmental storytelling. It doesn't just need to be necessarily the images on your screen. It can also be
the music.
The music.
Yeah. So when we talk about music here, we're talking about those little things that you maybe don't notice in the moment. One of the things that I love about environmental storytelling is that it tends to be the thing that fans discuss later. So one example that I'll use, just because I know people have this as a touchstone, in Breath of the Wild, when you are fighting the not Calamity Ganon, what am I looking for here? The wind blight.
The wind blight.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. The blights that have like sort of possessed each divine beast.
Yes.
Who fought the original champions. In that boss music, there's actually like SOS beeps.
Oh, I remember you showing this to me a little while ago.
Yeah. So they're very, very subtle, and I didn't notice them when I was fighting because I was invested in not dying.
Yeah, you were kind of trying to not just collapse.
Yes. So it's one of those things I didn't notice till later, but there's these little things that are throughout the game in the music. And those SOS beeps are supposed to be like when those champions called for help, right? So in some, they're, really, really soon. But Rivali's, for example, the SOS beeps don't start till really late in the fight. And when they do, they're very persistent and very prominent in the music.
So they're kind of panicked.
Yes.
So it's kind of telling the story of the original fight.
And it gives you some characterization. Like, you've sort of met Rivali, you know that he's this, like, very egotistical person, but you realize that he was so egotistical, and then when he realized he needed help, he called for it because it was probably too late to actually get any help, right? So you get characterization through music, which is something I know you have to talk about for Metal Gear Rising.
Yeah. So I know I have lots of examples for lots of characters. Undertale uses its music to set tone, to let you feel the sadness or feel the depression or feel the hope and the swelling joy. We all know how music can create emotions in viewers and players to let you feel what's happening. When the boss music goes epic, you feel cool, you feel strong, you feel ready for an amazing fight.
Yes, when I queue up my boss playlist for my players when we're fighting something.
Of course.
Yeah.
But then there's Metal Gear Rising. And this is a very direct way of doing storytelling, but also still very clearly environmental.
It's not direct within our
framework
definition of direct.
But it's still important because in Metal Gear Rising, you make it to a boss fight. There's about 6 key boss fights in the game, I want to say. There's one versus the Metal Gear. Then there's each major mercenary enemy they have to fight, and then the final boss. Right. So that's 6. And in each one, when you make it about halfway through the boss fight, you get some epic event with them. Sundowner, who's an incredibly disturbing character when you learn about what he does. He's bad. When you fight against him, he has these shields to block against you. And if you specifically target those shields to destroy them, now you can defeat him without breaking the shields, but if you target the shields and breaks them, he will have a moment where he screams that he's invincible and puts on an attack visor and goes like right at you, hardcore, aggressive fighting. But more importantly, this music that was in the background suddenly has lyrics, right? And this lyrics of this guy who is despicable, evil, unforgivable, literally the only character in the entire game that I would say is genuinely unforgivable.
Unredeemable.
Completely with the evil things he does. He for reference, he targets orphan children with everything. He's bad, really bad. His entire song is called Red Sun, and it's just this epic about his love for like a nature paradise, of this love for nature, for the real world, of talking about the fading sun, which has its own hidden meaning of like the world itself collapsing in disarray as the sun sets on the world, but also just this homage to just who he is as a person, his love for nature, his love for the world, and his view of creating paradise.
And you're only getting this through the music.
Yeah, and there's another character too that's very important, and his name is Sam. He's a samurai, it makes sense, right? Now, Jetstream Sam, as a character, is a very egotistical, very powerful, very in-your-face style character. He's Brazilian, and he is the meme of the peak Brazilian male, right?
Okay.
Very much the meme came from him. He's very... He bullies you a lot as a character, taunting you and saying that you're not powerful enough. He calls you Jack, which is a name that is supposed to be incredibly insulting to your character, as it was a nickname for a time period where he did very dark things, because your character is not perfect.
Right.
And when you do the fight against him, you disarm him halfway through the fight, and he starts fighting you with his fists until he gets his sword back. And in that, his music changes to the lyrical version again. And you hear this line that says, like, that he doesn't even know why he's fighting. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know what he fights for. And there's this line of, like, the man in the mirror nods his head. That he can't even recognize himself in the mirror, yet he knows what he must do. And he knows that he has to fight. And he knows that he has ideals to stand for. But that's all that is left. There's nothing left. There's nothing left of who he is. There's nothing else but this need to fight for ideals. This drive that he has. Now, him as a character is incredibly interesting throughout the game as well, as you eventually learn he's the only character who's not enhanced as a character. He's the only one who's really fighting you with his own pure strength, and you have massive levels of enhancements, and he still nearly kills you. He is very powerful, but he's just internally lost, confused, unknowing, and honestly, if you really listen to the song, kind of scared.
Right.
And you don't get that from the game. You only get that by listening to the music in a fight to the death against him, where either you die or he dies. And there is no middle ground. Someone is dying in this fight. Who's it going to be?
Yeah.
And it's this musical storytelling that I love. This idea of you don't even need to just have music as something to elicit emotion, but something that tells you, who characterizes who the enemies in the game are, who the people are, by telling you their past, their present, their thoughts, their emotions.
So I think environmental storytelling, when it's done really well, can not only tell you story and give you pieces of information about what's happening, but can provide characterization and tone.
It's everything. You can get everything from it, and it's unlimited in what you can do. Now, if you are thinking about using environmental storytelling in your own creations, there is a bit of a word of warning here, of course. You're not going to get amazing musical storytelling and environmental puzzles and this kind of like emotional environment from Undertale and on and on and on. A lot of these stories were successful because they picked one style. Unboxing used mementos, little ideas, little figurines. Undertale used emotion, and Metal Gear Rising used music. They went all in on this idea they had for how to tell their story.
Well, I think D&D is really a good heart for describing how to do this well.
Yeah.
Because D&D is storytelling.
Yeah, for you as a listener, this is your chance to tell these stories in a way that will impact people sooner rather than later, rather than writing a novel
This
or making a game.
This is a good place to really experiment with them.
This is your chance to learn. So we promised that we'd spend some time talking about how to do this. So let's kick it off.
So what I want to say about D&D environmental storytelling is, broadly, it's most effective when you get your players 90% of the way there and they figure out the last 10%. So what I mean by that is give them lots of clues. Give them lots of opportunity to learn about the world, to learn about the environment, to learn about the space that you're doing. Let them do all of that, right? You put that out there, but don't tell them the end of the mystery, right? You don't go, oh, and the murderer is this NPC that you've been working with the whole time.
Of
Surprise!
course.
That's the last 10% that you let the players do themselves.
And I think every player has had that one moment where they walk in a room, it's littered with bones, littered with blood, and there's someone standing in the middle, and it's, well, I know who that is.
I know who that is.
That's the boss.
Yes.
That's not really what we're getting at for the heart of this, though. That is environmental storytelling. It creates fear or an eminence of power amongst the boss. But you've seen it dozens of times before. But there are other ways of doing environmental storytelling in D&D that I think would be good for us to talk about. So to launch into here, Vi, do you have any examples that you think you could give us for environmental storytelling in D&D?
Yeah. I've been listening to Unprepared Casters a little bit, which is a very good actual play D&D. And in one of their like earlier arcs, there is a crypt that they go into, and it is sort of a laboratory, and they're looking through papers and notebooks and ritual sigils and all of these little like clues and things. And the DM doesn't present all of this information all at once, right? They don't go, all right, you're in this space and here's a book that you should look at and you should look at this one too and also go over here, right? They could just go, here's the space. They set the stage and the players still go in to put all the clues together to try to figure it out. And that's really where this is best. When you let your players do most of the work. You shouldn't have to fail a perception check to miss a clue, right? But you should be able to find it. It shouldn't be something that's presented to you.
And I remember one of my times DMing. Now, I did this with one of my friends, James, and we ran this simultaneously with two groups, both playing the same campaign. Now, James would go on to turn this into one big campaign that would continue on for far, but I would stop it after this one shot. And what it was is our players got onto a ship, and the ship just wrecked onto an island, a very small island that looks like it used to be bigger but has been flooded over time, and is now just a single house that's falling apart. And they go in, and they find when they try to go deeper into the house besides the entranceway, it teleports them back to the front door. So there's this mystery of how do you unlock it, and they have to do a series of actions. And these series of actions, let's say they make it into the living room, and they have to make it to the next rooms. They have to figure out the story of what happened here. Now, they find a little book that's a journal from someone, but it's only the first few pages with very little information. But certain actions reveals the story to them. If they were to pick up a wine bottle that was on the ground and put it back in the wine shelf, they see these like ghosts appear that are dancing together, a man and a woman, one of which takes the wine bottle and they take like a drink of it together, right? And there's this scene where if they find these art pieces, they can find out the name of the woman. And if they put them back and use her name, the images appear again and show her painting, right? Or there's a scene where when they're dancing, you see the man has like a ring, but you don't know what happens to it. And they're dancing near the fireplace before it ends. And if you search in the fireplace, you find the ring.
Oh, cool.
Right? So these little puzzle hints of you're learning the story. Now, the end of the story, because I don't think anyone has this module, it's not official, was that I think he ended up killing her by accident.
Okay.
The ring was meant to be eternal love, eternal grace, but it was cursed and killed his wife.
Oh, dear.
And he fled.
Yeah.
And the final scene of this was something beautiful as well, because they were brought there on a ship that crashed, but eventually the people who owned the ship came back to get them, like the bigger ship. They were on like a small boat from a big ship. And when he like sees the ring, he has this pause. That's
Who is he?
the captain of the ship.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. And when he sees the ring, he has this pause for a moment. And when the players ask, because you let the players ask, like you do this through your voice, he's like, oh, it's just, I thought I remembered something. And if you dig deeper and you have the journal, the captain is the husband who fled.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Because there was a way for him to save her, but he chickened out because it would kill him. And it's just this moment of being like, there is so much behind this character who I knew nothing about.
Right.
And it's just this wonderful thing. And you learn that what he was doing was trying to bind a demon to the ring to get the magical power he needed. And the demon tricks him, right? But you get that through these little journals, these little events. And it's just like, it's one of my favorite examples of environmental storytelling I've ever done. It's been a while since I thought about this campaign too.
Cool. I've just thought of another example. So when I joined the home game that I'm a player in right now, the first like sort of episode segment, I think I'll call it, like the first chunk that I was involved in, involved exploring this underground city, but they didn't know that it was there. It was this, they had left behind like the leader of a group of mercenaries that they worked for because he had fallen down a crevice and like broken his leg and they couldn't like get him. So they sent this like elite task force, which is the player group, to go get him back. And they have these people with them who sort of know the area. So, you know, they were like, oh, well, when we were kids, we'd play down here and I think you can get there from this, right? And then opened a magical door kind of by accident. And you enter this city that has been destroyed. And you piece together from what's happened with like, there's a tower that's been knocked over, and there's like big claw marks on the ceiling and on the floor and stuff like that. You sort of piece together that I think maybe there was a dragon here. But we also got through murals and a graveyard at one point, we sort of understand who was here and why they left. And that's all part of the bigger, you know, mission of the thing. But what I want to focus on here is just like, we immediately saw claw marks and, you know, scorch marks and went dragon, right? That's environmental storytelling right there, is what's been left behind by somebody's actions.
And it can be more on the nose than just this as well.
Yes.
Right? I had one game where my players had this like, they had to go through these tunnel systems underneath a tree root that was just infected with this fungus everywhere growing mushrooms. And they found this area where the fungus just ends. And they see what looks to be a beast, but on closer inspection is like an ent, kind of like it's a druid ent. And he has this corpse of a girl with him, and you see claw marks around where the fungus stops. And upon talking to him, you can see that he looks injured and hurt and sick. And this entire...
We've talked about this before, and it broke my heart the first time.
This one breaks my heart. Let's see if I can remember it perfectly.
This episode's so sad.
It's going to be so sad. What you end up learning, and you get this immediately with claw marks in this guy who's sick, is that he was keeping the fungus away from the corpse of his wife, the person he loved. And he turned into this ent to bind himself to the area to have the power to protect her body. And the final quest you get from him is to go give her a proper funeral with honors.
Yeah.
And he can't leave because he bound himself there. And he ends up, he says that when she goes and she's at rest, I will be able to pass on. And it's just this moment of it's a little less environmental because it's direct talking, but you still get this feeling because this heavy impact of this fungus that's causing massive levels of problem.
Yeah.
And then this one holdout of a guy who turned himself into a beast.
This is a really good example of where those direct and indirect storylines sort of tie together.
That they can work together.
You use the indirect, the environmental storytelling to foreshadow what is happening, right? You see first the effects of this person's actions. You see fungus, line of fungus stops, and then you meet this person.
Yeah, and the claw marks around it too, of it looks like it was dug away at to stop it from spreading.
Yeah.
So what we can see here, and I think we've sent one very clear message with every single example today.
They're all sad.
Not just sad. That environmental storytelling lets you share emotion, that you get to understand deeper than you would ever attain from just getting it outright.
Yeah, from just a series of cutscenes.
Yeah, we never talk about feeling like crying from a lot of games, but suddenly these games use this indirect environmental method are pulling at our heartstrings and making us just want to sob on the ground.
Because they're so immersive, because they ask you, Gaia, the player, to figure out what's happening.
Exactly.
Right? That's what brings you into video games. I think that's why at the heart of all of the things that we talk about, that's why we like video games and tabletop RPGs, is because we are involved in stories.
Because the stories are a part of us, and we're a part of the story.
Yes.
And that's something amazing about it.
Yeah.
So now that we've given all of these examples, I think we have our next little task to do for today's episode. We need to talk about how you, as let's say a DM, could even hope to incorporate
where do
this
you even
into your stories.
start?
So how do you do environmental storytelling?
So in broad strokes, what I would say is to come up first with what happened? Who's involved here? Right? If you're telling a story about, let's do something very basic. There was a dragon who kidnapped a princess and they're going away in a tower somewhere, right? Someone's been captured.
Right. So the basic storyline.
You need to know your basic storyline, right? This is your metagame. I know exactly what happened because I'm the DM and I'm making it up, right? And then we get down to location. Where are the players going to encounter this? Are they going to encounter people who saw the dragon? Are they going to encounter people who knew the princess? Where is your connection to the party? And then what happens to a place when something like this happens? And then you can start to plant your little clues. So I would go top down.
Yeah, and then you've now had this story of hero going to go save a princess captured by a dragon. So you now need to ask what are the possible locations your players could go to? You're not going to be able to make 1,000 environments, and it's really hard to make them up on the spot. So think of your locations. I can think of 3 easy ones to do. The castle the princess is from, the forest trail to the castle that the princess is being kept at, and the castle the princess is kept at with the dragon.
Yeah.
You now have 3 environments that you know very well. And you now have a very basic storyline. So let's say we wanted to give some environmental storytelling. Well, what are some of the basics, Vi, that you think we would need to really sell this message to the players?
Well, I think let's say that you know that your players are going to encounter maybe the road first.
Yeah, and remember, your players would have talked to the king, and the king said, "Go save my daughter, please, for she has been kidnapped by this horrendous dragon." And you've gotten the quest. You've talked to people.
Yeah.
You're on the road now.
Yeah. Now, I think this road where you're now going to, fight the dragon to get the princess back, this is where you might find scraps of the princess's clothing. You might find... maybe she's trying to lead you in the right direction, right? Maybe she's deliberately leaving her shoes, pieces of her dress, that kind of thing. Or maybe you're finding the fact that she's fighting back. Maybe you're finding I don't know, like dragon blood or dragon scales or something, right? Something that tells you the story of what is happening from the castle she was abducted from to the castle they're going to, right? Does the dragon have to stop for rest? Does that tell you how long they've been traveling? Or is this dragon injured? Why does he need her? Those are things that you can answer on the trail.
And you could even go a little more unique if you wanted to. For example, let's say you want an ice dragon. Having signs of freezing and melting, like a river with like a bridge of ice,
Absolutely.
would be something completely fascinating to do. But now,
Or this is where you might find, oh, the dragon's working with somebody. So there's, 4 footprints where the dragon landed, and then there's cart tracks.
yeah. Now let's say we wanted to really shift up this story to tell something more unique using just environmental tricks. So you go to meet that original king, right? Now let's change this up a bit. This is a king who wants to marry a princess from a far off land who was captured from the dragon upon during the delivery process of her traveling to meet this king to marry, right? Now, let's say you want to portray that king as faulted, someone who is not necessarily good, maybe not a bad guy, but not necessarily good.
He's morally gray.
Morally gray.
Yeah.
So let's say he's aggressive, he's angry. You show him with a very simple one, very simple symbolism. He is always wearing armor and a sword.
Yeah.
He's never soft. When you go to his palace, it's super well guarded, and let's say you go to the princess's room to examine, and you notice on the window bars covering the window, and the door is made of steel.
You might even notice the treatment of servants. You might notice that they cower when you walk by them, or cower when the prince is near.
Or even something super basic as just averting their gaze and only speaking when spoken to, and holding this really proper formal that seems to relax when you leave.
And this is something you can let your players infer, right? This is something where if you have a player who's very insightful as a person, might go, can I roll perception to see if that person is scared of us or scared of the king?
Yeah.
Right? And that's an answer you can give.
And another thing that you could do for very perceptive players is accessorize the king to show these signs of something wrong. Let's say he has a ring that glows blue but red when angry.
Yeah.
Something simple that your players would only notice with high perception. But yet,
something that connects him to the dragon, maybe.
Maybe not even the dragon, just evil magic. And now let's say you're on the hunt for this dragon, and you notice while it has damaged the environment, there's no dead animals.
Yeah.
It hasn't killed anything. The bridge made of ice, or the fire, or the trees scorched by fire, nothing's dead. Everything's alive and still going. We have a bit of a background music for this one. But everything is still alive and going. And then they make it to the castle, and the castle's in ruins, right? The one where the princess is kept.
Oh, absolutely. This is your stereotypical broken rubble ruin of a castle.
Let's shake it up again now for your players. Now you know this dragon's evil. You've been told it's evil. Captured a princess. You go in and you see the princess, and she's unharmed.
Yeah.
There's no damage, not even her clothing. Actually, in particular, her clothing looks fixed, if anything, right? You notice the room that she's kept in is the only good room in the castle. And the dragon himself doesn't seem to be threatening her. Now, what have I just done, a little secretly, is I have quite literally just given you the plot of Shrek.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Right? I'm creating the plot of Shrek.
Yeah.
But that Shrek itself as a movie is a beautiful example of environmental storytelling, because we've just laid out these different things you could do to shift the narrative without ever talking about it.
Yes.
The king has a magic ring. The princess's room is barred up. The environment's damaged, but nothing is dead. And the princess herself is being kept well by the dragon, and the dragon himself shows low resistance when you approach. You as players, you as a DM, could still see your players attack the dragon, rescue the princess, and return her to the king. But on a complete other way, the players, if they start picking up on these clues, suddenly know who the real villain could be.
Yeah.
And your real villain is Lord Farquaad in this case, which don't name him that.
Yes.
But these little hints make a massive difference, right?
They're much more interesting as a player to encounter these little clues and start to put together in your notes things that you write with a question mark, or you're like, oh, you underline oh, her dress is really clean. That's weird. Stuff that makes you think as a player. Those are the little details that you want to hide as a DM.
And you have to imagine, when listening to this story, just you, Vi, listening to it, it got more interesting with each little thing we threw in for the players to discover. You're like, Now, you started catching on
Now,
eventually that I was doing the Shrek plot.
this is the Shrek plot.
It's the Shrek plot. But even so, that basic plot line, the most fundamentally easy plot, got way more interesting with every detail and more curious.
Yeah.
And if you didn't know the movie I was referencing and the fact that I was on my phone looking up the plot to verify,
Yes.
right? You would probably be like, "Ooh, something bad's happening. Like, there's
Yeah.
something more here, and I want to know more as a player," right?
So let's see if we can break down steps for somebody who's listening and wants to do this in a game.
So, part one, get your basic story.
Big story. Let's do big players and their motivations, right? So we have dragon, king, princess, and maybe you can infer something about your party's role in this. You know that they're probably going to get a quest.
Yeah. And now, the next thing you might want to do is think of areas. Castle, road, broken castle. Something basic, again, for a story.
Yeah. And something that would be decently easy for a party to figure out, like, oh, we have to go from point A to point B.
Yeah, something pretty basic. And then part three is to really dig in and say, what do I want my final plot to be?
Yes.
What is the actual underlying events that are going on? And it's important for you to think about that. A classic bait and switch, oh, the king's actually evil and the dragon's actually good, is the most basic of examples still.
Yeah. But it still works if it's well done.
Yeah.
Right? You can still have fun doing that.
And then once you figure this out, you now have the top level plot, the basic princess taken, king.
What you think your players are going to know.
Yeah, and then you have your underlying, this is what the truth is. This is what I want them to experience.
These are the relationships between these people.
Yeah, and they don't have to be different. They don't have to be like a bait and switch.
Oh, no.
What it could be is simply the front level plot is what the players see, and the behind the scenes is what you as a DM know.
Yes.
That's all it has to be. And then you come to step 4. How can you put hints of this in the world? Now, we gave the example of there's nothing dead in the environment that's destroyed. The princess's room is barred up, and when the king gets angry, he has a ring that flashes red.
Right.
Right? All of these things say bad, bad, bad.
Yes.
Right? But other games do it differently. In Undertale, they, choose grayscale to say sad.
Yeah.
Right? And you, as the DM, have many other options at your disposal.
Even your narrative style can change, right? If you go from your presentation as a DM, right, your role playing as a person, if you want to invoke different emotion, you can just change the way you're speaking, right? You can start to describe, the ruined castle kind of sorrowfully if you wanted to, right? Something that, like, if you, Gaia, are my player and you notice that I'm acting differently, you're clued into it, right? You want to know why I've just changed something. And that's a little bit meta, but I mean, you are sitting across the table from me.
Yeah, and that's also fundamental to design. Shifts in presentation are key here. But for building the environmental storytelling, you have to ask, really, what impact would this top level plot have on the world? But knowing the truth, how would it be changed? And that's fundamentally what you're looking at. The dragon does no harm, and the king flashes evil.
Yeah.
Right? But let's say you're looking at a different plot. In that ghost plot line that I had, some changes could easily have been that you see the ghost take an action, and now when you explore the area, you can find remnants of that action.
Right.
But finding remnants beforehand reveals the ghosts.
Yeah.
Right? I thought about, here's the plot. Now here's how these two people would have behaved. Now here's what impact on the room they would have had from these actions. Knocking down a bottle and tipping over the art and throwing the ring into the fireplace. And they can find it.
These two examples actually, one of them is a staging ground for narrative, and the other is narrative clues hidden within those places.
And both are valid examples.
And both are really good ways of thinking of environmental storytelling.
So from this, you as a player now, so you've learned as a DM, here's how you have to think. And to be honest, there's not much more to say to the DM. Think about the environment, think about what impact the actions would have, knowing the truth, and put little hints of that around the map.
My biggest life hack here is put away all your resources. Put away your Dungeon Master's Guide, your Player's Handbook, put it all away, put your laptop away. Go get a piece of lined paper and a pen and just write down in broad strokes what's happening. That's going to give you way more than trying to include a bunch of things.
Or if you're the artistic type, draw the scene and
yeah.
draw what would have happened knowing the truth.
Even if you're not the artistic type, go think about you can draw stick people if you wanted to. What event is A to B and what did they leave behind? I remember looking through my dad played D&D in the 90s, right? And I have his second edition stuff. and he has a whole plot that I am going to steal. But the first thing in that binder is a drawing of the castle, because he just went, what sort of person lives here? Right?
And it's what you
How
need
is this
to know.
described? Like, and that can tell you a little bit about the person first if you start with the environment.
Yeah. So when you as a DM are designing, think about what impact each scene would have, and then just put that in and let your players discover it. The top level is Ruined Castle, but the deep in is that there's something nice in there, and the princess is being kept in the best possible spot.
Yeah.
Something simple, but clues your players in. And remember, in D&D, your players aren't seeing what's happening. It's descriptions, so you can be a bit more broad about it.
Yeah.
But for you as a player now, you're playing games, and you notice a game has a wonderful story.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about it to people. So, Vi, you know a game has a wonderful environmental storytelling. How would you tell that to a friend or to an acquaintance when recommending the game as your reason? Let's say you're unpacking, you're talking about that game. How would you recommend that to someone?
Well, I can say that I really enjoyed it because I found myself immersed in the game, because I was an active participant, because I had some agency in the game, and I was making inferences, and I was doing the act of discovery. And that's for environmental storytelling, for me, that act of discovery, the trust that a game has with its players to collaborate, to immerse, to act, to ask the player to infer what's happening. Those are the things that make a strong game that has environmental storytelling in it.
And I love that phrase that you use. And I think this is the phrase I want the players to take away from this. The act of discovery. The beautiful thing about environmental storytelling is the act of discovery. The ability for the player to learn what's happening. If I was to recommend a game to a player, let's say Metal Gear Rising because of the music, I would say that the characters, while seemingly on the front are these cool, badass, epic villains, have this interior difficulty with them, each one that I think is fascinating and beautiful and interesting.
Compelling. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that when recommending this to someone, what I would say is there's more story than what you're told. There's more to see and more to do than what the game says. And that every single thing you do makes the game so much better, step by step. So I think that's how I would recommend it to someone. That there's always more than meets the eye, and the act of discovery is the beauty of the game.
Yeah.
So we're coming around near the end of the episode now, and I think what we've covered today is everything we were kind of setting out to say. We've told you as the viewer, as a listener, about what makes good environmental storytelling. We gave examples of normal environmental storytelling like Undertale and Unpacking, but also musical environmental storytelling, and even the bit of the SOS messages from Breath of the Wild, which I think are beautiful examples of using
They're
it.
very subtle too.
But very, very well thought out and well done. And then we talk about D&D and how various DMs have used environmental storytelling to tell stories, but not only that, also how you as a DM could build a story and put the environment in to make something more interesting, even if it is just the plotline of Shrek, let's be honest. So, now that we're ending up, I would like to say, what episode do you think, Vi, we should be doing next for the players to listen to?
Reward systems.
Reward systems. So, as a bit of the basics for the player as we're ending off, how do you make the player, or you as the player, feel good about what you've done and want to play more? How do you reward someone for investing their time, their money, and their energy into a game? And what do you really look for to take away from doing so? So, I think that covers pretty much everything. Next episode, reward systems. This episode, well, environmental storytelling, but you've heard it all.
So you can tune in next Thursday at 9 p.m. We'll see you there.
Yep. Thursday, 9 p.m. I almost said Tuesday.
Yeah,
Thursday,
that's not
9
it.
p.m., CHSR 97.9 FM in Fredericton, New Brunswick, or coming soon online on sites like Spotify and Apple Podcast for you to tune in to The Art of Play featuring Gaia.
And Vi.
And we will see you next time.